On July 5th, something profound shifted. You may not have seen it, but it was real. Not a date picked at random, not a coincidence written into your calendar, but a spiritual timestamp marked in eternity. This was the moment heaven aligned with your destiny. The moment the divine reached into your timeline and said, "Now." For so long, you moved through life unseen, unguarded, vulnerable to the darts of this world, words that wounded, betrayals that broke you, environments that stifled your growth. You walked through storms without shelter, cried in places no one could hear you, endured trials that didn't make sense. You carried burdens that weren't yours. You stood alone in battles that should have never been yours to fight. But that all changed the moment divine protection activated over you. July 5th wasn't just a day, it was a spiritual intersection. Something had been watching, recording, measuring the weight of your tears, the length of your suffering, the cost of your silence. That divine record keeper, call it God, fate, or destiny, finally moved. On that day, unseen hands reached into your life, marking you in the spirit. From that moment forward, protection was no longer something you prayed for, it became something you carried. It wrapped around you, invisible but unshakable. You didn't feel it immediately, because the shift wasn't physical. It was atmospheric. The air around you changed. The way people looked at you shifted, subtly at first. Those who once disrespected your presence began to feel discomfort. Those who underestimated you began to second-guess themselves. Not because you had changed outwardly, but because your covering had. Before July 5th, you may have felt like prey, always running, always anticipating the next strike. Whether it came in the form of betrayal, loss, sickness, manipulation, or confusion, it seemed like you were always dodging something. But when divine protection activates, you stop being prey. You become untouchable in a realm where touch is not about physical contact, but spiritual access. There are realms, dimensions beyond what we see, where decisions are made long before they manifest in the natural. On July 5th, those realms received a new decree regarding your life: do not touch. This wasn't about favoritism, this was about fulfillment. You were marked because of everything you endured, everything you didn't become, everything you chose not to do even when you had the right to retaliate. The universe took note of your restraint. The spiritual realm recorded your humility, your patience, your faithfulness. Divine justice isn't always swift, but it is exact. And when the moment arrives, it does not miss. On July 5th, it hit its mark, and that mark was you. You may have wondered why certain things suddenly stopped bothering you. Why certain people began falling away from your life without conflict or closure. Why the chaos seemed to lose its grip on your mind. That wasn't randomness. That was spiritual insulation. The things that used to pierce you, that used to shake you, began bouncing off. It's because divine protection isn't a force field that surrounds your body, it's a recalibration of your frequency. You were tuned to a higher vibration, one that chaos cannot cling to. The enemy, whether you interpret that as negative people, evil energy, or inner demons, could no longer find your signal. You were encrypted by heaven. This encryption doesn't make you perfect. It doesn't exempt you from life's pain. What it does is shift the narrative. Before July 5th, pain had the power to define you. After that day, it can only refine you. Struggles may come, but they no longer have the authority to destroy you. Attacks may rise, but they will not land. The divine protection doesn't guarantee ease, it guarantees outcome. You will come through. You will not be overtaken. You are now walking with a seal on your life that speaks on your behalf when your voice fails. It's important to understand that this mark is not always visible to others, and that's intentional. The divine covering isn't meant to attract attention, it's meant to disrupt agendas. Those who used to manipulate you find their tactics failing. Those who plotted against you encounter resistance they can't explain. Not because of anything you said or did, but because of what you now carry. On July 5th, you became unapproachable to what once easily accessed you. That anxiety that used to own you doesn't feel at home anymore. That depression that used to visit uninvited can't find its way back in. That toxic relationship that had you bound can't seem to reach you now. They're trying, but something's in the way. This divine intervention doesn't require your understanding, only your awareness. It's already in effect. Whether you feel it or not, the barrier exists. It's woven into your days now. It's what kept you safe in places where others fell. It's what pushed you to leave when you didn't know why, only to find out later that you dodged something you couldn't have seen coming. This protection doesn't announce itself. It simply does its job. Quietly, powerfully, consistently. From July 5th forward, you're not moving through life alone. You're walking with an unseen guard, an eternal signature that whispers to the world around you, this one is not to be touched. You didn't earn this. You were chosen for it. And that's what makes it so potent. Because if you couldn't earn it, then no one can disqualify you from it. Not your past, not your mistakes, not the opinions of others. The activation of your protection was heaven's decision, not man's. Which means man can't undo it. You don't have to defend it. You don't have to explain it. You just have to walk in it. Let the mark speak for itself. Let it close the mouths that used to mock you. Let it confuse the enemies who don't understand why their plans keep failing. Let it bring peace to your spirit when your mind is still catching up. Everything changed on July 5th. That day was the silent turning of a spiritual page. A new chapter began, not with fireworks, but with a whisper in the heavens that declared your name. You didn't hear it with your ears, but your soul responded. Something within you settled. You didn't know why you suddenly felt lighter, but you did. That was the shift, the lifting of the old weight. That was divine protection, freshly activated, wrapping itself around your future like a shield. Not flashy, not loud, just absolute. There are forces in this world that operate in shadows, forces that move without names, that strike without warning. You've felt them before, not always in physical form, but in moments that crushed your confidence, drained your energy, broke your heart, or clouded your clarity. You've known the weight of invisible warfare, attacks that no one else could see but you could feel deep in your spirit. You've walked through spaces where the atmosphere changed without explanation, where your peace was suddenly disturbed, where anxiety and doubt crept in like fog. These weren't accidents. You were being touched, influenced, manipulated by forces that wanted to keep you bound, small, and silenced. But now, after your marking on July 5th, those forces no longer have power over you. This isn't metaphor. This is spiritual law. The moment divine authority steps in and places a seal on someone, access is revoked. The same way a door can be locked from the inside, your spirit has been sealed from interference. That means no more entry for things that used to destabilize you. The confusion that once plagued your decisions can't reach you like before. The patterns that repeated through your bloodline, the generational weight, the emotional cycles, the addictions, the self-sabotage, no longer carry the same authority over your choices. The binding has been broken, not because of anything you said or did in the natural, but because a shift occurred in the spirit. A declaration was made that cut the strings connected to your soul. You may still feel the tug from time to time, but you'll notice something different. The pull doesn't stick. The influence doesn't land. That's because they can't touch you now. Forces, both seen and unseen, operate through agreements, spoken or unspoken. When you live unaware of your authority, you often unknowingly agree to allow things into your life that do not belong. You settle, you absorb, you accept, not because you want to, but because you think you have no choice. That's how influence works. It wears you down until it feels normal. But something shifted on July 5th. That agreement was nullified. The spiritual contract expired. The permissions were revoked. You're no longer in alignment with the energy that kept you in cycles of defeat, confusion, stagnation, or fear. You may still encounter those energies, but they can no longer root themselves in your life. Before the shift, there were things you tolerated that were slowly killing your light. You stayed in environments that drained you. You entertained people who diminished your value. You entertained thoughts that tore down your self-worth. These were not random choices. These were spiritual manipulations, tactics designed to make you forget who you are, to disconnect you from your source, to blind you from your calling. But when divine clarity enters, deception loses its grip. And that's what happened the moment you were marked. Clarity replaced confusion. Purpose began to whisper. Identity began to rise. And with that, the strongholds began to fall. They tried to access you the same way they always had, but the frequency had changed. Your spiritual address was updated. The same old tricks didn't work. The same emotional manipulations didn't land. People who once had power over your emotions suddenly seemed powerless. Environments that used to trigger you now feel strangely silent. That's not your imagination. That's divine interference. The space around you has been claimed by higher authority. The spiritual energy around you has been recalibrated. Now, every step you take is covered. Every word you speak carries resonance. Your no means no. Your yes carries weight. You're no longer a vessel that can be hijacked by other people's projections, expectations, or agendas. You'll notice it in conversations where your voice once trembled but now stands firm. In decisions where you used to second guess, now there's peace. In confrontations that used to unravel you, now you remain unmoved. That's not because you've become cold or distant. It's because you've become clear. There's a difference between protecting your heart and hardening it. You're learning the difference. What you're feeling is not detachment, it's spiritual insulation. You're being covered in wisdom. And when wisdom walks with you, foolishness has no invitation. They can't touch you now, not because you've become unreachable in the natural, but because access has been denied in the spirit. Even people who don't know why they're suddenly uncomfortable around you can feel the change. It's not personal, it's energetic. You no longer mirror the frequency of their chaos. You've become a disruption to dysfunction. Where there was once a matching code between you and your old pain, the coding has changed. The frequency has shifted, the echo is gone, and because of that, the door has closed. Even the inner voices that used to torment you, the whispers of inadequacy, the internal critic, the voice of doubt, have been silenced. Not because those voices have vanished, but because your spirit now recognizes them as false. They speak, but you no longer listen. They call, but you no longer answer. You're beginning to remember who you are. You're beginning to see yourself through divine eyes, not distorted ones. That's why the influence is breaking. That's why the fear is lifting. Because recognition is protection. The more you know yourself, the less access anything false has to you. This new spiritual immunity isn't about arrogance or superiority. It's about alignment. When you align with truth, deception loses its power. When you align with love, fear has no grip. When you align with purpose, distraction feels foreign. That's why certain friendships feel different now. That's why certain routines no longer satisfy you. That's why your soul is craving depth, silence, authenticity, and connection with the divine. You're not running from the world, you're being rerouted to your rightful place within it. And the ones who used to feed off your light without giving anything back, they feel it, the boundary, the distance, the new standard. They're confused by it. They try to provoke the old you, to call you back into an old pattern, to test if the change is real. But what they don't understand is that this isn't a performance. It's not a phase. It's a divine recalibration. You didn't choose this marking, it chose you. And now, whether you're in a crowded room or sitting in silence, the shield is active. You may still feel pressure, because pressure is how diamonds are made. But pressure is not the same as attack. Attacks are meant to destroy. Pressure is meant to develop. And from here forward, nothing that touches your life has permission to destroy you. The only forces allowed near you now are those that serve your elevation. That's the divine protection you've been marked with. That's the law now. The enemy has been notified. The attacks have been archived. The influence has been shut down. Access has been revoked. You are chosen for a greater purpose. Not selected randomly, not accidentally pushed into position, but intentionally placed. Before the noise, before the trauma, before the world shaped your voice into a whisper, your name was written into a plan far bigger than your surroundings. July 5th was not just a date, it was a signal. A spiritual activation that echoed back to the moment your soul was created. It was the unlocking of something ancient within you, a reminder from the heavens that your existence is not a mistake. You carry something that can't be duplicated. You've been marked not for fame, not for attention, but for impact. Your life has not been easy, and that is no coincidence. Chosen ones rarely walk simple paths. The weight you've carried, the battles you've endured, the questions you've had to wrestle with, none of it was without meaning. The pain was preparation, the silence was shaping, the delay was divine. Everything you went through was setting the stage for the unveiling of your purpose. You were not meant to blend in. You were not born to live beneath the surface of your potential. The struggle was not punishment, it was positioning. Your soul was being trained for something greater than survival. You were being readied for influence, for healing, for breakthrough, not just for yourself, but for others connected to your assignment. There are people you haven't even met yet whose lives will change because you answered your call. There are spaces waiting for your voice, atmospheres waiting for your presence, hearts waiting to unlock through your example. That's why you couldn't quit when it got hard. That's why you couldn't give up when everything told you to. You were being held by something stronger than your circumstances. Something in you refused to die. That refusal was purpose talking. That resistance was destiny rising. Many won't understand it. You'll often feel isolated in the early stages of your becoming. Purpose has a way of separating before it gathers. Before elevation comes extraction. Before revelation comes solitude. You'll be pulled away from old comforts, old circles, old identities. Not because you're better, but because you're different. Set apart, not superior, but significant. You don't fit because you're not supposed to. You're not called to continue cycles. You're called to break them. You're not here to follow trends. You're here to shift atmospheres. This is why the road has felt lonely at times. Why your spirit has outgrown rooms your body still had to sit in. Why conversations that once excited you now feel empty. You've been awakening. And awakening isn't loud, it's quiet, slow, sometimes painful. But it leads to clarity. And clarity reveals purpose. You're starting to see it now, aren't you? The pattern, the reason, the divine fingerprints all over your timeline. You can feel the stirring in your chest, the voice that won't let you settle, the pull that keeps drawing you towards something deeper. That's the whisper of your assignment. It may not look like anyone else's. And it's not supposed to. Purpose is personal. It's not measured by applause, but by alignment. It doesn't require a platform. It requires obedience. You've been given something, an energy, a perspective, a depth, a gift, that others can't replicate. It's not about being the loudest in the room. It's about carrying a frequency that heals, uplifts, breaks chains. Your very presence is a disruption to darkness. That's why you make certain people uncomfortable without saying a word. That's why you've survived things that were meant to destroy you. You are covered not because you are lucky, but because you are necessary. Necessary for someone's healing. Necessary for someone's freedom. Necessary for someone's awakening. You were marked so you could walk through things others couldn't, not because you deserved the pain, but because you were built to carry the lesson. You know what it's like to rebuild from nothing. You know what it's like to be broken and still choose to believe. You know what it's like to be overlooked and still decide to show up. That experience is not just your story, it's your anointing. It's the oil that drips from your life when you open your mouth, when you step into rooms, when you create, when you lead, when you simply choose to be fully yourself. Your scars are sacred. They speak of resilience. They tell stories of transformation. They testify that what was meant for harm became the doorway to your calling. That is the mark of the chosen. You weren't picked because of perfection. You were picked because of willingness. Because you kept going. Because your heart remained soft. Because your spirit never let go of the idea that life could be more. You're not here to be passive. You're here to create, to liberate, to spark movements in small and mighty ways. That's why your life has felt like a battlefield. Not because you're cursed, but because you're carrying something the enemy fears. Purpose intimidates darkness. Chosen people are often attacked early and often. But what they don't realize is that every blow you've taken has made you stronger. Every rejection sharpened your discernment. Every delay refined your character. Every detour led you closer to the version of yourself that's fully aligned with your assignment. What once broke you now builds you. What once confused you now clarifies you. You're learning how to move differently. How to speak with authority. How to stop chasing and start attracting. How to stop explaining and start embodying. Because when you realize you're chosen, you no longer beg to be seen, you become the vision. You no longer wait for validation, you walk in confirmation. You don't strive to impress, you simply express. The shift isn't outside, it's within. And once it's activated, everything around you begins to respond. You've stepped into a new spiritual contract. July 5th was the signature. The moment of divine agreement. The recognition of your readiness. Not to be perfect, but to be present. Not to have all the answers, but to walk with sacred questions. Not to prove anything, but to move in faith. That is what you were marked for. And even when it doesn't make sense, even when the road ahead feels unclear, something inside you knows you can't go back to the way things were. You've seen too much, felt too much, grown too much. You are chosen for something bigger. Something that won't always look glamorous, but will always be sacred. You may not always feel it, but it is always real. The call has been made. The mark is sealed. And your presence here is proof that the assignment is still unfolding.